Good evening. This will be the final word in the Epistle of James. We're just going to look at two verses. As I said this morning, I could have tried to fit it in there, but it really is its own standalone idea, and I think it's a very important one. It kind of brings full circle one of the big main ideas that James has in mind, as he's writing to a Christian group that was under a great deal of pressure from every angle. They'd been driven from their homeland, for one. Remember, James chapter 1, he speaks about these Christians in the dispersion. And the word that he uses for disperse it's like a scattering. It was fast. It's like if you hit a bunch of marbles and the way that they move across the floor, they were scattered. It happened quickly. There was no time to gather things up. The persecution was heavy where they were, probably there in Jerusalem, probably after the stoning of Stephen, and they've been driven to various places in the surrounding ancient world. And he's writing to them because wherever they went, they weren't in a necessarily a Jewish state. Probably would have been some Jews present, but they'd lived their whole lives up to this point in a place that the Torah and the law of God was central to it. Everything has changed in recent times. Since Christ rose from the dead, the Christian church had been established, the gospel was going throughout the world, and now they're living in these foreign places where they're being oppressed in various measures. They're experiencing the difficulty of maintaining a Christian identity when surrounded by pagan ideals, and they are tempted in that right to have a kind of syncretism where there's a part of them that wants to look Christian, go to church, sing Christian songs, do Christian things in those terms, but not totally, not fully. And this is why James writes to them in chapter 4 about this warning about their wanting to be friends with the world. Whoever wishes to be friends with the world makes himself an enemy of God. It's not that they wanted to be friendly toward the world in the sense of being distinct and showing the love of Christ even toward enemies. They wanted the acceptance of the world. They wanted the approval of the world. Do you see that there's a difference between those two things? There's a difference between, in Christian terms, showing love for your neighbor that wants his eternal best, whatever that results in how he feels about you, oftentimes it being that he will feel negatively toward you. There's a difference between that and just having the lust for his approval, having the desire for recognition in the broader world, to be seen as, people that can be, can sit at the table and to be looked at as, reputable and to be seen in those terms. That was the problem for them. They wanted that. They wanted the world's approval, and when you want the world's approval, then the approval of God goes to the wayside very often. So there's all these pressures. And so James, if y'all would turn it to my iPad, this is the final word. It's very simple. James says, "My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins." Why would James, at the end of this epistle, give this admonishment? The reason why is that this was a great likelihood for the Christians to whom he was writing. There was probably a number of them had already determined, I don't want to fully remain in this Christian camp because of what that means for me, what it means for my family. If I operate like the world, I can get an edge, I can be favored. I can be, respected in the broader community. My family can be seen as, respectable parts of the community. We can have more money and status and all of that. And so he's been writing the whole time to them saying, be warned about this kind of double-mindedness. And now he's saying, look, now that you know the standard of God and what it means, recognize that there may be some who leave that. And then he incentivizes a kind of evangelistic pursuit of our own, of those who may have left. And so I want to run through this verse with you, and I'm going to briefly give 7 points. The first one, and this is, there was a time where this maybe wouldn't have even needed to be said, but here we are. The first point is that there is such a thing as the truth, with a capital T and with a definite article on the front of it. It's not just truth, it's not just a truth. There is such a thing as truth with a capital T that overrides everything, supersedes everything, and we live in a time and space where maybe people believe in truth as an idea of personal values, personal identities, cultural values, cultural identities. But there's one that transcends time, it transcends cultures, it transcends personal preferences, it transcends human will, and it is rooted in the Christ. And I just want you to see this. He says, "My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, and just so you can see it, down here in verse 19, the truth, tes aletheos, this little word right here, this little bitty thing, that is the word the. It is a definite article. Anytime the definite article is present, it means that the word that follows is definite. Even if the definite article isn't there, it still may be definite, but it may not be. In this instance, he's saying there's such a thing as the truth. All roads don't lead to salvation. Truth is objective. And I think that what that means is that you ought to have you ought to have a solid standing on any number of issues. And someone ought to be able to come to you and say, what do you think about this? And there ought to be here's the truth about it. Here's the right way of looking at it. We've probably all seen this week that the new Pope, a man named Bob from Chicago, is now the Pope. And I've been reading a lot of analysis about him. Not that the Catholic Church affects us in any respect, but it is interesting, given this time in history, watching what is happening on that front. And it's interesting, the analysis that I'm seeing from this person who's now the highest authority in the Catholic Church. And there are so many who are saying, we just really don't know what he thinks about this, or what he thinks about that, or which way he's going to lead here, or how is he going to be culturally conservative? What's he going to be? We just really don't know. Well, here's somebody that's been in their church leadership for a very, very, very long time, and I'm just wondering why? Why? Because this culture rewards being political, and thereby being politically correct, and thereby not taking firm stands on various matters. So there is such a thing as definitive truth, and we ought to know it and hold it up. Number 2, it is possible to live outside of it, thinking that you are in it still. Now, where do I get that from here? Verse 19, "My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, And that's this word right here. If any one of you wanders from the truth, and here it is down here. This word, to wander, it can mean that, but most often it just means to be deceived. It's not like somebody knew one day, I'm in the truth. And I know this is true, and it's the truth, but I've decided that I no longer want to have the truth. I've decided that I want to just leave it all together and reject it outright. Usually, it doesn't happen that way. And you can probably recall those that you know who've drifted from Christ over the years, and it was probably progressive. It probably was a kind of thing that happened bit by bit by bit. It is possible to live outside of it thinking that you are still in the truth, because he says they have been deceived. That's what it means, to be deceived from the truth. Right here. From. This is going away from it. Deceived from the truth. All right, that's number 2. Number 3, it's possible to know the truth and to lose your grasp on it. He says this, and this has been one of his repeated themes throughout this letter, but in verse 19, my brothers, adelphoimu, my brothers. Just heartfelt. He loves these people. And notice, he says, if anyone among you wanders, if anyone among you wanders from the truth. This is talking about brothers. It's possible to at one time have a grasp on this and then to leave it. In the Old Testament, some of those kings like Hezekiah or Asa, you can think about some of the Old Testament kings that were righteous for such a long period of time, and then there's something that happens toward the end of their life where they just wander off and they leave it. And that's usually not intentional. James is making the point that these people who've left the truth, they at one time were a part of this core group. This was a brother. That's number 3. Number 4, how does it happen? Well, this wandering, it happens from being deceived. That's how a person wanders. The word for wander and the word for deceive, it's the same word because it's kind of encapsulated in the same idea. The reason why I would kind of wander over here is because this looks like greener pastures over here, so I'm going to move over this direction, or that looks like greener pastures over there, and it seems to me, given where I'm standing here, that over there looks better, so I'm going to move over there. Well, the way that the movement happens is usually by some kind of deception. So the question is, where does the deception come from? How does the deception happen? And I'm fascinated with this because, as you know, my first priority in this life is to get myself to heaven. And one of the things that I've taken from Jordan Peterson is that even really good people, really normal people, can do horrible, terrible things. You look at the people through history that did really bad things. They were just human beings. I mean, how did they get there? Nobody's above sin. Nobody's above rebellion. Nobody is. And so I want to know from the Word, how does somebody move from here to there, and I want to be aware of it so that I don't let that happen to me. Well, James is saying that it happens by way of deception, and I want you to see in James chapter 1 and verse 16, it's been a while since we've been here, but in James chapter 1 and verse 16, he uses the very same word that he's using in James chapter 5 about the person that wanders from the truth. It's this this word right here, planaste, that's the same word that he uses in chapter 1. This is how he opened the letter, and here's how he's ending the letter. He opened it by saying, in verse 16, "Do not be deceived, my brothers." I don't know if you remember, probably don't, it's been a while, the manner in which the deception happened, because I did a whole lesson about it, and I broke open, here's what the nature of the deception is. It's twofold. It's for a Christian to be deceived, and he's saying, brothers, don't be deceived. For a Christian to be deceived, it's one of two things. It is either, and this is based on the preceding verses, this is based on the verses before verse 16, it's either that person has some kind of sinful desire within them that they are being lured along by, and so their desire is something that they're then taking, and they're saying, this must be God's direction because I feel it, right? It's natural. I feel it. I want this. And so the first is that they would just think that God is desirous that I do this. And this is why he said, when you're being tried, do not say, God is the one tempting me, because God himself cannot tempt anyone. And he himself isn't tempted by evil. But the other temptation, and I think this happens a lot, is to think that, and the other deception, is to think God is not good. Because this is what he follows his statement with in verse 16. He says, "Do not be deceived, my brothers." And then he says, "Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there's no variation or shadow due to change." God is good, and everything about him is good, and everything that he gives is good. And this is set in a context where in verse, right up there at the beginning, verse 2, he speaks about trials of all kinds. I know that there are many that will be deceived to think God isn't good, because how could a good God allow me to have these trials? Or there are many that would think they would confuse God with their own temptations. And you see this a lot today, where a person is led by their own heart, they kind of extrapolate out their own heart, hold it up in the air, and confuse it with God, thinking this is God. He's the one that's directing me in this way. He's leading me in this way. And there's so many applications for that. But wandering happens from being deceived in one of those ways. That's number 4. Number 5. Preventatively, what do you do about that? What do you do about it? If deception is the way that people leave the truth, so then you have to ask, where's the voice coming from? What is the voice that they're hearing? What message are they listening to? What messenger? What authority? What's the music that they're hearing? What cultural narrative are they listening to? What books are they reading? Right? It's just because it's sold at Barnes & Noble doesn't mean it's good. Just because it's sold at Mardell doesn't mean it's good. There's a lot of trash there. There's a lot of stuff that's theological heresy there. And so preventatively, what's the best thing that you can do? Well, the best thing you can do is speak the truth in clarity so that error cannot be cultivated. Or speak the truth with clarity such that if a person ever does adopt an error and then they leave, they will one day have a waypoint back to the truth. They will remember, oh, there was that place and those people who once said these things, and now that I've run to the end of this line and I realize this wasn't the truth that it was told me it would be, they then have some direction and some context for how to get back. One of the things that light does, and Jesus said that we are the light of the world, the light What does it do when you turn on the light in your bedroom at night? It removes the shadows. It gives clarity. If you thought that stack of books over there was a predator, you can turn on the light and see it's just a stack of books. Or you thought that was a pillow on the ground, but it was your child's, army truck. You can turn it on, and then you're not going to step on it and hurt your foot. But what light does is it exposes darkness. That's what it does. That's why in Ephesians, Paul says, arise from the dead and Christ will shine on you. And he says, don't have anything to do with the darkness, but instead expose it. Expose it. Call it out. Make it very clear so that people see in the light of Christ what is right and what is wrong. So that's the best thing we can do, is just to speak with clarity. Because the way that the error happens is by being deceived concerning what is true. Number 6, the way that we win people back is by continuing to speak with clarity, even when they're gone, reaching out by way of clarity, trying to build a kind of relationship where you could then have a conversation with them about, and hopefully having the kind of relationship prior to their departure that would lend credibility to you when they are gone, so that you could then go to them. And it's very difficult if you didn't have any relationship with a person at all, and for them to leave and to then try to get them back. Because then they didn't feel like they were a part of something. So build the relationship and then try to cultivate it, continue to cultivate it even after they've left. But speak the truth. And, earlier in James, he says that the wisdom from above is first of all pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, and good fruits. And so you're being instructive, but it's seasoned with salt. And so somebody's left, try to win them back and actually actively try to do it. And the only way you can do that is by speaking the truth to them. Now, lastly, number 7, notice what he says in verse 20. So coming from verse 19, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, so now he's back in the fold, he says, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will, notice this, he will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. I think that's the bottom line is, have y'all ever seen that analogy or that diagram that had, it's called like the descent to atheism or something like that, but it's this man that is walking, he's up in this light-filled room, and he's walking down these steps toward this dark space. And there are various forms of it where, you have a kind of apathy that moves to a kind of agnosticism, that moves to a kind of humanism, that moves to, atheism, and then there are various forms of it, but it's progressive. I saw one the other day, and it had a number of individuals in broader evangelicalism. Have you ever heard the name Rob Bell? Rob Bell was really big, and maybe he still is making some waves. I don't really hear much about him anymore. But when I was in college, and I graduated in 2011, but around that time, his books were, I think he had a book called Love Wins or something like that. And one of his central theses is that there is no such thing as eternal hell. And that because he can't imagine a loving God doing that to somebody. And this is extremely attractive in a culture that's deciding, I think I don't really want to follow Christ anymore. And then to pair that with an evangelical leader who's saying, if you reject him outright, then when you leave this world, he taught a doctrine called annihilationism, where when you leave, you're just obliterated. You're just gone. You don't exist anymore. Okay? Let me ask you, is that a consequence? What does anybody, if that is the way that it is anybody going to know it or feel it or experience it or think even anything about it after it's over? No, because he says they're gone. They cease to exist. Their soul, even, that God made eternal, doesn't exist anymore. And I think that that's an attractive idea, but that's not what the Bible teaches. James says, if you bring a sinner back from his wandering, you will save his soul from death. And this is the death that Jesus repeatedly talked about. This is the death that Jesus said is eternal. And that's really what's on the line, brothers and sisters. People that leave the fold, and I'm not talking about somebody that says, hey, we're moving to another town, we're going to another church, or our kid is going to this church over here, we're going to commit over there and submit under those. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a person that says, I'm done. I'm done with Jesus. I'm done with the church. I'm going my own way. And they just leave outright. When that happens, their soul is in danger. And James finishes with an admonition to me and you, and he says, really, the idea is make them a priority. Bring them back. You have to love them enough to bring them back. You have to love them enough to have an awkward conversation with them. You have to love them enough to be willing to build despite the fact that that may be difficult. If a person is on a road to, if you knew that a person was going to be, if you knew that a person had some disease for which there was a cure, how many would avoid having that conversation with them? If you knew, I know a cure, you have this disease, here's the cure, it's simple, just take this cure and then you can live. Would anybody avoid it? No. And yet, all the time, this conversation is avoided. James finishes his letter. We've looked at this for 27 weeks. God is finishing out this word by saying, brothers, if anybody wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. James got this idea from Jesus, didn't he? That's what Jesus was doing when he came to this world, and people were saying, why are you giving attention over here and over here? And Jesus said, if you lost one sheep, what would you do? Would you stick with the other 99, or would you leave them and go find the one? He said you'd leave the 99 and you'd go find the one. So let me just encourage you with that. Consider your brothers and sisters. I'm sure all of us know some people by name. Consider them, pray for them, love them, reach out to them, try to build with them, pray to God for, I think that this is a fitting place to pray to God for the kind of wisdom that is pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, and good fruits. The kind that is able to be clear, but able also to show clearly the love of Christ within it, but to be motivated by, I want this person's salvation. We want as many saved on that day, and it's going to be a glorious day. But right now, Jesus said that my Father's been working until now, and so you and I must work until he comes. So let's put our hand to the plow, try to win souls right here in our midst, try to win souls in the community, and make it a priority to win back the souls that have left. So if you have any need at all, if you wish to give your life to Christ, there's an opportunity while we stand and while we sing.